The crypto surge past 50,000 mark, helping a lot of these companies that have dabbled in it, like PayPal and Square. But none really seem to be benefiting as much as Coinbase, which is now valued at more than $100 billion ahead of its much anticipated direct listing. So is this just more evidence that this crypto rocket ship just getting going? Joining me now, Bitcoin author Jason Williams. Jason, I'm trying to get before we even go to Coinbase, the laser eyes. I mean, I'm trying to qualify for it, my man. I got my photo ready. What do I have to do next?
You've got them. Just go back to crypto Twitter. Your picture's waiting for you. The community welcomes you with laser eyes wide open.
All right, I appreciate it. So another huge weekend for Bitcoin. Got up to like 58,000. Musk kind of mused that it might have been ahead of itself. Listen, he did that with his own stock. Anyone who sold Tesla on any times that he felt like maybe it was ahead of itself, regrets it. But I did see where Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary Yellen, took another shot. Are you concerned how focused she is on illicit activities and all the illegal things you can do with Bitcoin? She seems to be laying the groundwork for something. I'm concerned about her.
Look, Charles, if Janet's really concerned about illicit use of currency, look no further than the U.S. dollar. And your listeners know that well. They were also thinking, and I think Janet was considering taxing unrealized gains, and I'm sure that would go over really well with your listeners.
Yeah, Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary. But I don't know if you can overlook. And again, Jason, it seems to me that this is becoming a juggernaut. You've got bigger names piling on. You've got this thing moving. The argument for it, the fiat currency, and I just had this conversation with Brian Westbury. Every currency, including the Swiss, right? I mean, they've devalued their currency. So the argument is there, but I just can't see. I'm just concerned that these governments are going to try to find a way to slow this thing down. You're not concerned?
No, Charles, you're already seeing governments try to ban Bitcoin. So I think Pakistan tried to or has some type of ban on it. I think Guatemala did the same. And all it does is expedite adoption in the communities. We've seen that. It's already played out. You can't ban Bitcoin.
Right. Where's it going next? We hit these highs. It sort of meanders a little bit, pulls back for whatever reason, and then the next leg seems to be more impressive than the last.
Yeah, I mean, look, you brought up the $58,000 number we hit this weekend, dropped down to about $46,000 today, which was effectively a 20% price move down. If you've got to put all this in context, if you go back to the bull market 2015, 2017, we had 30% price moves down, Charles. So I like to put this all in context. I expect to see moves in the 20 to 30% down as we march along to six-figure Bitcoin here in 2021.
Can you walk us through the types of institutional investors you've been fielding phone calls from?
Yeah, so far we've seen both, trading partners, players that are active in the space already, the fundamental investors that are long-only investors that are coming in and buying in small pieces so far. And then, of course, just long-term kind of portfolio managers, advisors, investors that are both traders and active and long-term investors. So all of them. I think the big opportunity will come when we start to see Bitcoin become a core part of large portfolios, whether that be mutual funds, institutional pools, and others that I think are going to be exciting to see. And this is what ultimately this is about. Like, you bring an efficient vehicle for people to access this when they haven't been able to in the past. That's what we expect will really help change Bitcoin's positioning in long-term asset portfolios.
Our next guest is the head of blockchain and distributed ledger technology at the World Economic Forum. Sheila Warren joins us now. Sheila, before we get to the broader issues of blockchain, let's start with Janet Yellen's comments this morning about Bitcoin. She said it was inefficient for transactions, highly speculative, and the amount of energy consumed in processing those transactions is staggering. What do you think of her comments?
I think it's interesting that Janet Yellen, there's been a little bit of speculation about what she says and what that's going to mean for the market. I think that it's not unfair to say that Bitcoin has been a volatile and speculative asset. I think that's a fair observation. I think that's fairly obvious. The energy question is something that comes up all the time, and I find this fascinating because it's all a question of relative to what. When we think about the existing financial system and how much it costs to print, store, and transfer money, some energy uses are considered okay, and some energy uses are considered not okay. And I always find that a really interesting point that's brought up as a criticism.
Certainly. So, Sheila, if last year was the year of institutional investment in Bitcoin, what do you expect this year, and how do you see it impacting this volatile chart that we're looking at right now?
Well, I do think that we're going to see probably more institutional investment. I mean, certainly we went out big last year and early this year with that, and the recognition by institutions that Bitcoin can serve as a store of value. In my mind, that is kind of a proven concept. It's sort of a done deal. I think we'll continue to see Bitcoin as part of a portfolio diversification strategy. Bitcoin isn't correlated with the usual investments. There's a lot of liquidity people are sitting on right now. And so I do think we'll see more of this kind of engagement. Whether at the scale of some of the movement we've seen of these big players, I'm not so sure, but I don't think that investment in Bitcoin is going anywhere. That's for sure.
That around last week, Gartner had this survey of CFOs, and about 5% say they would consider adding it onto the balance sheet. I wonder if you think that number sounds about right, and how reasonably high could it get if corporate treasurers and CFOs start trying to do what you're describing?
It actually sounds quite low to me. I would expect that there are a lot of CFOs who aren't willing to come out and say that they've got Bitcoin somewhere in their portfolio. I think it's a matter of what percentage of the portfolio it might be, and I do think it remains pretty small for most portfolios, but it would surprise me if most responsible financial managers are not pushing into crypto and Bitcoin specifically. And I would say that's going to continue.
Sheila, is it your view that Bitcoin will or should stabilize either at this level, significantly higher, or even lower than here?
Bitcoin is there's such a fad to it, such a FOMO element to it, and that's a lot of what I think is driving volatility. You can't discount good old-fashioned FOMO, people wanting to say they own a Bitcoin, or at least in SATS. So I do think it will stabilize as the focus shifts a bit to the technology, which is what I think is really exciting about it. I wouldn't say that's the focus of why people are jumping in at this point in time, but I do think that we're going to get a little bit more rationality about why people are investing in this and why it actually matters and why it has longevity, which is what I do believe. So my hope is that it will stabilize over time. I think that is inevitable, actually. What that time frame is really depends on how many more celebrities kind of jump in, right, and start driving the price around.
It goes from 55, I blink, it hits 56, I blink, it's down to 55. Is it really sustainable at these levels?
Look, I think we have to zoom out here and understand kind of both sides of the table here. On the one hand, on the retail side, we have a mega trend happening with Bitcoin, right? This happens across all age groups, but it's particularly pronounced within younger demographics. To put some numbers to this, we've got about 34% of Americans say they're likely to buy Bitcoin over the next 5 years. And by the way, that stat comes from back in the fall before the major price move. So before there was a lot of increased attention around this. And then, on the other side of the table here, we have the institutional story, right? So this has been something that's been materializing now for a couple of years. People have doubted it, but it's absolutely taking place today. You see this with major companies making allocations, major pension funds making allocations. And really right now, what we're seeing is the major private wealth management platforms are scrambling to find investable vehicles for their clients. Because at this point, it's a competitive imperative for them as their competitors and competition move into the space. It's no longer viable as a large private wealth management platform to say that you don't have any vehicle for crypto.
Well, Spencer, Elon Musk, of course, Tesla leading the way in that, making that investment in Bitcoin, except that he comes out and he says, well, Bitcoin is just less dumb than cash. Does that sound like a roaring endorsement to you?
It does not sound exactly like a roaring endorsement to me. And look, I think that Tesla is a bit of an outlier here. I am tremendously constructive on the institutional story, but do I think that, the vast majority of the S&P 500 companies are going to allocate part of their treasury to Bitcoin in the next couple of years? Probably not. But I don't think that that changes the growth story of what's going on here. I mean, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is just an incredibly unique asset where you have exposure to both scarcity and innovation bundled together in one asset. There's really nothing else like it.
I understand that, but if the use case is just a weaker dollar, right? Negative real yields. If you're holding cash on inflation adjusted basis, you're literally losing money. Is that it though? I mean, is that enough to really get this institutional interest?
I don't think that it has to be a bearish dollar story. And in fact, I think a lot of Bitcoin holders are not necessarily holding Bitcoin because they're bearish on the dollar. Sure, I think there are some allocators that think of it as a hedge to what could happen in an inflationary environment. But really, I think that the story is more of a story of supply and demand here. I mean, the supply of Bitcoin is fixed. And if we zoom out and think about, okay, you know, best estimates suggest that only 2% of the global population has any exposure to Bitcoin. So if we want to think about whether Bitcoin price is higher or lower 3 to 5 years from now, we really just need to think about whether more or less than 2% of the world's population will want exposure a few years from now. And when you look at that 2% and we double click, I mean, these are relatively diehard supporters that are very reluctant to give up their Bitcoin. On the other hand, we have 98% of the global population that has no exposure, and every passing day, week, month, and year, people are increasingly inclined and warming up to the fact that Bitcoin is real, it's here to stay, and this is an innovation that's not going away.
How closely are you watching Bitcoin these days?
I mean, it's hard to avoid Bitcoin for sure. But, you know, I think it's a volatile asset class. All you have to do is look at the chart of it, right? So I think it's come a long way from being really a ways and means for illicit transactions to where we're at today, where it's being used much more as a form of payment and being accepted by several different retailers. And there's being infrastructure built in the financial system to accept that. But that doesn't mean that it's not being used for illicit transactions anymore. So I think what the action that you're seeing today that we're talking about is perhaps some of these big guys are simply taking profits after a very fast run, while the retail investors still remain very intrigued by it. So I think we're in very early innings of the Bitcoin story here and crypto in general, and it's something that we're going to definitely keep our eye on.